And that may become more and more important. I'm going to finish this talk with some really sobering and bad news. An update on what's happening at Fukushima in Japan. Now, mostly in Australia we call it Fukushima, but at Fukushima, are you all familiar with that? Are you all aware that there's a triple meltdown going on? And what a meltdown is? A meltdown, like a nuclear reactor, a fission reactor, is this plutonium or uranium which is fissioning away, producing an enormous amount of heat in this stainless steel containment vessel. I don't know how thick the stainless steel is, but it's massive. And then it's in a big concrete shell, meters thick. A meltdown is when the control of the nuclear reaction is lost. And in Fukushima, it was lost because of the tsunami knocked out the power lines, so there was no cooling. And the emergency diesel generators were placed in the basement. Right? Can you believe it? Just to make it worse, when I did some research on it, Fukushima was built by General Electric starting in 1958. When they first got there, the cliff, the building site, was 30 metres above the ocean, but they cut 20 metres off it to make it easier to build the plant, even though there was a history of tsunamis in that area. And then they put the diesel generators in the basement. I mean, if that's not criminally culpable, I don't know what is. But what's happening now, 3 of these have burned through the steel, burned through the concrete. They're now in the ground, and they're hissing and bubbling away. The only reason they're stopping them going critical is by putting 300 tonnes of seawater on them every day and then letting it wash out into the Pacific Ocean. Right? When cesium was detected on the west coast of the US, you know what the US government did? They doubled the safety levels for cesium and stopped testing. Right? We are in the hands of psychopaths. Now, I don't want people to go away panicked by this, but it really is a call to action. If you want to maintain your health, just to make it a little worse, Building 4, and you can verify all this, it's all on the internet, Building 4 was damaged in the hydrogen explosion. If you remember 8 years ago, there was a big bang, a big flash. Building 4 had one of its legs blown out. And then TEPCO, the company running this thing, admitted to, instead of having 1 year's supply of spent fuel rods, they had 10 years in there. So there's 1,200 fuel rods. A fuel rod is something about wrist thickness and about 2 metres long, but they're rather fragile. And they're packed in something like a cigarette packet. You know how the cigarettes are all lined up and very tightly packed in this swimming pool-sized body of water to keep them cool indefinitely. Building 4 is 4 stories above the ground in an Olympic-sized swimming pool with these rods in it. Now, with the explosion, it blew a leg out of Building 4 and all the water drained away. They're just hosing it down to keep it from blowing up, basically. Right? You couldn't make this stuff up. It's like you're living in a nightmare and everyone's just sleepwalking as though it's okay. We're still mining uranium in this country. I mean, the one good thing that could have come from this, we put an immediate cessation on the mining and milling of uranium, but no, it's just business as usual. So we'll get that uranium back one day, but unfortunately it's going to come via the Pacific Ocean. The real problem is the Japanese had been sending robots in to try and shore up the leg of Building 4, but the gamma radiation is so intense, the circuits are melting. So you can't even get robots in there. For a little while, they rounded up all these homeless men and gave them what seemed like a lot of money for these people to go and do things, but they all died, evidently. And they don't, that's the sort of level of ethics that you're dealing with. So listen, there's no time for complacency and there's no time for silence, right?
I thought they were just about to dump all the water out into the ocean.
Yeah, you're talking about the tank farms. What they did, they had about 10,000 of these big tanks that they kept putting up, but all the tanks are now leaking. Right? So yeah, the tank farms are leaking and they're going to vent them to the ocean, but they're taking ocean water every day. Right? It's just unbelievable. Now, people say, well, what should we be doing? I've got to say, I'm not a nuclear engineer. I've got no idea what the solution to a meltdown is, but the one thing I know for certain is you don't do nothing. Right? What I would do if I had any say in this would be convene a United Nations meeting of all nuclear-capable countries and stick them in a big hall and say, you come out when you've got a solution. or at least a plan for containment. But saying nothing and pretending it's not going on is a disaster. Right? Much of the world's population depends on marine omega-3. Omega-3 is critical for health. It's an essential fatty acid, the lack of which leads to a whole host of things that we're now experiencing. Increased cancer, increased depression, increased anxiety, probable increased autoimmunity. So most of the disease epidemics we're having are the result of an imbalance of omega-3 and 6. If we lose the marine source of omega-3, what are we going to do? We'll have to depend on plant sources. Thank God hemp seed has come along, and supplemented by chia and flax, we can probably get by from that point of view. So just use that as a take-home message. Right? Now, once you get sick, I won't say it's too late to take action, but it's very true that an ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure. And it's much better to keep yourself healthy, keep yourself properly nourished, keep your omega-3-6 balance well in favour of the omega-3 and your oxidative stress to a minimum, than get sick and then have to come running up to Nimbin to try and get some pot to sort of get rid of the crisis. Okay? I'm not denigrating medical cannabis. It has a wonderful symptomatic... hey? Yeah, grow and eat hemp. If you have any influence on your children or your grandchildren, get into the habit of eating hemp seed regularly. The easiest way we find, we make a smoothie for the children, hemp seeds, some berries, a bit of banana, something like that, whip it up. You can make it taste really nice. You'll do them a massive favour. You'll encourage the development of their brain, right? You will prevent them being paralysed from action by anxiety or depression. Right? Has everyone else noticed the same changes that I have in this country over the last 20 years? It's gone from being a country you really like to be part of. If you met Australians overseas, they're always interesting and vibrant and things like that. Now they're a bunch of whinging fuckwits, to put it bluntly, on the whole. It's really sad to have to say that. But it is. We're the second fattest country on earth.
They blame it on the blow-ins, mate. Everybody that's come into the country in the last 20 years.
On what?
On the blow-ins.
No, I don't think it's the blow-ins, mate.
I realise that.
Yeah, they blame it on all sorts of things. Maybe it's the hippies up at Nimbin. I don't know. But listen, that's what I've got to say today. So there's much more to health than just cannabis, even though it is important. And the basis of health first starts with your attitude, right? Then the air and water you breathe, even without talking about fluoride. Is there anyone here that doesn't try and avoid fluoride in their intake?
We do.
Hey?
We try to. You decide try or not try?
No, to try and avoid it. So everyone here tries to avoid fluoride. Ah, good. No wonder I like coming up here. Right? But I'm not saying it's the primary responsibility for the degradation of the spirit of this country, but it's done a huge amount of damage to the brains and psyche of the population. Most people aren't aware that the majority of the world's countries that were fluoridating after the Second World War, and basically the Americans started fluoridation because of a surplus of fluoride as a waste product of aluminium smelting. Now it's made from a waste product of fertiliser, but there was a huge amount left over from the Second World War aircraft production of aluminium, and they forced it on the world to get rid of it at a profit. All the European countries stopped fluoridating years ago, decades ago, and there was no change in dental caries. Right? The impact on dental caries is minor, and it can be much better managed by just good dental hygiene. No, that's true. You go and look at Dr. Declan. He said Ireland's still fluoridating. Northern Ireland is not, and Southern Ireland is. And if you look at the cancer incidence, for instance, they mapped from the British Cancer Registry pancreatic, breast, bowel, and a couple of the other cancers, leukemia, and one of the other cancers, 5 common cancers. And they found on average it was 25 to 30% higher in the fluoridated area. In Erin's Island, that's sort of more or less genetically homogeneous, so the genes are very similar between north and south, but the fluoridation alone has a demonstrable effect on cancer incidence. And that's freely available on the internet as well. Dr. Declan, I think, was the activist that actually published that. But it's all from official data. Yeah, what else can I say on that happy note? Right? We're in grave peril. Right? It's like the last days of the Roman Empire. The sort of the idiots are partying like there's no tomorrow, bread and circuses. You know, we'll drink beer and watch television, but it won't get you anywhere except into an early grave, and only after a prolonged period of sickness. Right? I mean, dying is one thing, but dying after having a sick life is much worse than having a healthy life and dying. Right? And it's really your choice. But you have to keep yourself informed. Don't take anything you hear, accept it as a proposition, but do your own work, do your own investigation, look further into things. I mean, look for Dr. Klenner, K-L-E-N-N-E-R, in 1949. I mean, the work was done then in an honest way, because there was no Murdoch press to distort things. People did things because they were scientists. Archie Kalakarinos wasn't interested in an ideology, oh, vitamin C can't work. He said, it might work, let's try it. And he watched the death rate go from 50% to 0. Right? So we'll end on an optimistic note. You can keep yourself healthy in an unhealthy world. You can largely protect your children from an autistic regression after the immunological insult of immunisations if they're pre-loaded with vitamin C and zinc and very well nourished. Right? So bear all these things in mind, because once it happens, it's very, very hard to reverse. You can control the things, but it's a form of brain-damaging insult that's very hard to reverse. Right? If we have any condition, you imagine this, we have a condition that's robbing children of their future and destroying a family, because one autistic child destroys the family, because all the well kids are put in second place because of that. All the focus is on that, and it usually doesn't end very well. The best you can hope for is to manage it and make it a little less painful. If you had a condition that went up 800% in the last 20 years, don't you think there should be some questions? Oh, we don't know what's causing it. Oh, it might be just better diagnosis. What a pathetic escape from reality, right? You don't need to be a trained doctor to diagnose a kid in severe autistic regression. It's so painfully obvious that anyone can diagnose it. So it's nothing to do with diagnosis. It's to do with increased incidence.
Sorry, can I just ask back to the, so intravenous vitamin C, if we have access to that, as a maintenance program, how often would you recommend that we have?
Oh, you don't need intravenous vitamin C as a maintenance program. You just have the oral. Right, oral vitamin C, and there's different ways of taking it. Like my preferred way, because there's other things in whole nutrition. So, for instance, if you're not intolerant of citrus, and most people aren't, you'll squeeze a fresh citrus juice and then augment it with some ascorbic acid powder. Right, and you do that most days. It doesn't have to be religious, but most days. Right, the only side effect you get from that is often a little bit of bowel discomfort. You can have a little bit of diarrhoea and things. In fact, we use it for people, and chronic constipation is a bigger problem than diarrhoea, so that's not a problem. If there's bowel intolerance, then we recommend liposomal vitamin C, which is much better tolerated. But intravenous is only for people in crisis, all right? Like I said, it's $120 for 30 grams. You can buy a kilo for $60. You know, what we're trying to do is formulate vitamin C powder into an intravenous form without going through big pharma. It's not that technically difficult, and that's really what's necessary. Where even though the evidence for infectious diseases is very, very strong, its use in cancer is not as well established. And I'm still looking for evidence that it's useful in certain crises, and often to repair the damage of chemo. That's when it comes into its own. But in cancer, we have a much broader therapeutic intervention than just intravenous vitamin C by itself. Probably doesn't make a big impact. As I said, in Alan's case here, it was the fasting that got rid of his leukemia. There's no doubt about that. What's that? Oh, when you say combine it, no, you have your vitamin C every day just as a matter of routine, and you have the cannabis depending on what the indications are. They don't have to be taken together. Hey? Yeah. What you have to aim for is tissue saturation. You have to always be saturated with vitamin C. Animals like a goat, see, we had a mutation in the hominin line evidently about 60 million years ago because we were living in the bloody forest and eating leaves and berries, and we're just saturating vitamin C. So there was a mutation that we lacked the glucose. See, vitamin C is just made from glucose, and most animals can make it in their own body. You know, have you ever seen a goat? I mean, they eat any rubbish lying around and they're less body weight than us. They calculated they produce about 14 grams of vitamin C a day themselves. Right? We've just had a mutation because we used to live in an environment where you didn't need to make vitamin C. Because if you're living like the chimpanzees in the forest, your intake is saturated in vitamin C. Right? So yeah, we're fairly unique. Most of the animals, like dogs, tend not to get sick except when they're fed the wrong foods by over-loving owners and things like that. You know, considering the rubbish they eat off the ground, you know, if we lived like a dog, we'd be sick as a dog. I mean, it's a silly expression, but you know what I'm saying. Right? Most animals make a large amount of vitamin C, and that's responsible for their resilience. Okay? It's not a one-shot wonder. You still need the polyphenols and the rainbow diet and the omega-3 from the hemp seed and the avocados and all those things. You need a whole orchestra of wellness. But my final message is you are responsible for your own health, and vibrant, good health is not that difficult to achieve. Right? You don't even have to be absolute. You can have a weekend away, you can have junk food once in a while, but the beauty is, after you've been on a really good diet for long enough, you completely lose your taste for it. Like in another life, when I was sort of young and stupid, I have these bloody ham and cheese croissants, you know, and that was, I'm going to go to the cafe and have a couple of croissants and a few coffees. And after about 10 years, I hadn't had one. I'd been on sort of pretty healthy food, and I thought, gee, I think I'll have one. And I sort of picked it up, and it was sort of oozing this oil and things. I said, I'm not going to eat this shit. I sort of like myself too much. You know, you lose your wanting for it, right? I mean, junk food is like an addictive drug. Right? Just don't get addicted to it. That's all I'm saying. All right? Well, I hope that's somewhat useful.
Time went too quick.
Hey?
Time went too quick.
Okay. All right.